Kralvek Toynar stared through the observation window at the asteroid belt tumbling lazily against the backdrop of a dim red dwarf star. Fragments of rock and ice spun in irregular orbits, their dull surfaces catching occasional glints of starlight. It was a sight he never tired of, despite having spent the last few months surrounded by it. The system was as unremarkable as any they'd visited, save for one thing, the gravitational anomaly buried deep in the asteroid belt. Brooding again? "Kralvek," came Hesera's voice, her soft tone carrying a touch of playful inquiry. He didn't need to turn around to know she was smiling, her gaze always warm with unspoken optimism. He sighed, placing the datapad he'd been reviewing onto the console. "Brooding or thinking, take your pick," he replied. "This anomaly has me restless. I can't help but feel we're missing something." Hesera moved to stand beside him, her movements graceful as always. "You always say that. Maybe it's just because this isn't some monumental discovery." She gestured toward the belt. "Still, it's a beautiful place to work, isn't it?" Kralvek tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the charm of their surroundings, though his thoughts remained fixed on the reason they were out here in the first place. Beautiful, yes, but also vulnerable. His gaze flickered to the fleet of drones outside, still circling the station. "I don't trust those things to protect us if someone decides we're worth raiding." Hesera's easygoing nature shifted for a moment, the thoughts sinking in. But after a beat, she shook her head. "No point worrying. Trevik's got his head buried in calibrating the scanners. And you know him. He won't let anything slip by." She nudged him lightly. "Besides, the anomaly isn't going anywhere. Even pirates wouldn't know what to do with it." Kralvek offered a faint smile, but didn't respond. Their operation wasn't a high-stakes one by galactic standards. They were researchers, part of a small academic consortium scraping by with limited funding. Their assignment, to investigate and catalog the gravitational anomaly and gather data on its effects. There were half-formed theories about microlensing, or perhaps remnants of a collapsed stellar core, but so far, nothing groundbreaking. It was the kind of work that earned little prestige and even less funding. Trivok's heavy steps echoed from down the corridor, a mix of irritation and weariness in his stride. His form appeared in the doorway, carrying a pouch of steaming stew, in one hand, looking slightly frazzled. "I had to reroute a feed from the deep spectrum array again. The system kept locking onto stray asteroids." "That's because it's an ancient relic of a scanner," Hesera remarked, raising an eyebrow. "We're lucky it still works at all." Trevok snorted in amusement, sitting down at the table near the viewing window. "Lucky is pushing it, but it's still better than the drones. Those things couldn't find their way out of an open box." Kralvek, stepping away from the console and sitting down as well, gave a faint smirk. "Maybe if you lavished half as much attention on the drones as you do on the scanners, they'd surprise you." Trevok grinned back, his tone playful. "Maybe if the drones weren't patched together with hopes and scraps, they'd manage to stay in one piece long enough to impress me." Hesera laughed, her wings flicking lightly as she joined her two friends at the table. "All right, you two. Let's at least pretend we're professionals for once." Before anyone could respond, their communicators signaled an alert. The trio froze for a moment, their attention immediately turning to the main console that dominated the center of the room where a new message blinked in on the holographic display. "Unidentified signal detected." Kralvek got up from his seat and quickly made his way to the console, his gaze narrowing as he quickly brought up the source of the signal. "Grath," he muttered under his breath. "What now?" Hesera leaned over his shoulder, her expression focused. "What is it?" Kralvek's eyes tracked the rapidly streaming data. Strange emissions near the star, and a signal. This isn't just debris. No identification codes, though. "Pirates?" Trevok asked, his voice clipped, suspicion lacing his tone. "Doesn't fit their MO, Hesera said, eyes narrowing. "They would have jumped in right next to us, assuming they know we are here." "Then what?" Trevok pressed, his patience thinning. "Some kind of automated probe? Or something else entirely," Kralvek murmured. He straightened, his claws tapping the console, thoughts racing. "We're going to need full focus on this." Hearing this, Trevok and Hesera quickly finished their meals and took their places around the central console. Trevok immediately began to reconfigure, thus scanners to aim its instruments at the source of the signal, while Hesera began activating the station AI. Just a quick reminder before we get started, only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much! Now, continue amazing story. The ship shook slightly as the jump completed, and Elliot immediately initiated a system-wide scan like he had done countless times before. Exploration could get monotonous sometimes, but it paid well and could show you some beautiful sights. It would take about 10 minutes for the scan to identify the orbital plane and all bodies orbiting this star, so he passed the time archiving the last of the exploration data from the previous system. When the scan finally finished, Elliot opened the results. A few planets, a gas giant, an asteroid belt, and a cluster of unidentified signals right next to it. Shit, this could be trouble. Exploration data became more valuable the further out from human space you went, but could only be turned in once. In some cases, rival explorers resorted to violence just to prevent someone from beating them. To selling the data, he quickly engaged the mass shift drive, setting it to the Planck mass. The MSD worked by altering the mass of the ship to manipulate its speed. In this setting, the effective mass of the ship and all it contained was only 2176 micrograms. This made any propulsion significantly more effective, allowing the ship to move incredibly fast, but not quite fast enough to push past the speed of light, thus avoiding any FTL detection. Elliot adjusted his trajectory, pulling upwards relative to the orbital plane like always. This gave him a top-down view of the entire system, which made scanning far easier as you wouldn't have to worry as much about planets or a star blocking your line of sight on whatever you wanted to scan. The Deep System Scanner, an essential tool for any explorer, hummed as it deployed. It worked by analyzing what might as well be entire range of light, from the Planck length to ELF radio waves, to give him a full picture of the system. Within seconds, he focused in on the cluster of unidentified signals. The image and data that followed only deepened his confusion. That didn't look like any kind of spacecraft he had seen, more like a station. But how could there be a station? This far removed from human space, the question practically answered itself as Elliot froze in shock. Remembering the first contact protocol in which all pilots had been rigorously trained, he adjusted his communication systems to match the exact frequencies of the signals he had detected and began preparing a message. How does one communicate with an alien race for the first time? You don't speak a common language, probably don't have the same frame of reference either. First, he would have to establish contact. He prepared a signal containing a basic binary pattern, one that was clearly deliberate, one that hopefully couldn't be mistaken as random noise or an anomaly, and sent it off. The trio watched in confusion as the image of the strange object on their displays became clearer. The signal they had picked up was unlike anything they had encountered before, and the shape of the object defied all known classifications. By the way it was moving, it was obviously some kind of ship, but the station AI failed to match it to any known spacecraft in use by any assembly member state, nor did it resemble the common structures built by mining groups or rogue factions. The holographic display at the center of the console showed a 3D projection of the mysterious ship. There was a strange elegance to its design. When viewed from the side, it had a streamlined, wedge-like form tapering towards a narrow front. From above, it looked more like a long triangle with the tip removed. Hasara tilted her head slightly, her sharp, glowing eyes narrowing as she examined the ship. "That's not like any ship I've seen," she murmured. Could it be some kind of exploratory vessel, or maybe a traveler who took a detour? Trevok leaned forward, a heavy claw resting thoughtfully on the edge of the console. "This system is too far out from any standard station or outpost for a traveler to just be passing by. It's far too big for any kind of automated craft, but seems too small for a pirate ship, and I also don't see any signs of weapons or defensive systems. At least, nothing we can detect." Kralvek's gaze sharpened. "Whatever it is, it doesn't belong to anyone we know." He shifted his stance slightly, his tail flicking thoughtfully. "I don't see any reason for the Coalition to come this far out, and we know it isn't a ship from any member of the Assembly." The three fell silent, studying the image in front of them, a growing sense of curiosity mingled with unease. Suddenly, the sharp beep of the communication system startled them all. The AI immediately displayed what it was receiving on each of their monitors. A burst of static preceded the appearance of a series of numbers on the consoles once the AI managed to isolate the message from the cosmic background radiation. A string of binary code appeared on the screens. War 1 Sondi 10101101 Wos Wazia 1 Wam Zia 1 Sian 1 Sil 1 Monzia 1 Sil 1 Sia 1 Zia 1 Zia 1 Sian 1 Sil. The trio stared in unison, momentarily struck by the simplicity of the message. None of them knew exactly what it meant, but there was no doubt that it was a deliberate signal. Kralvek narrowed his eyes. Interesting choice of format. Hisara's gaze remained fixed on the data, her sharp eyes gleaming as she processed the signal. Wait, she murmured, her voice low with realization. Could this be a new species? Some kind of first contact event? This message? It feels like they're reaching out to us, starting with something fundamental. A foundation to build understanding. Anyone who wanted to do work at the edge of explored space had to undergo first contact training, and some parts of this situation reminded Hisara of that training too much to just ignore. Trevok's brow furrowed as he scratched a few of his scales, not fully convinced. First contact? It could be, but we don't know that for sure. What are the odds of a first contact event happening here and now? Hisara tilted her head, her feathers ruffling slightly. Unlikely doesn't mean impossible. Why else would they be going for something so basic? They're trying to establish something between us, to show that they understand communication. They wouldn't do that if they could already communicate with us. Even if they were in an emergency and couldn't just send a message, they'd still have more effective ways of communicating that. Trevok snorted softly, clearly still unsure. I'm not so sure, but if it is a first contact event, we'd better be careful. These kinds of things can be unpredictable. Kralvek's posture was stiff, his sharp gaze focusing on his screen, taking in the signal once more. If we assume this to be a first contact event, the question becomes how we respond. They're clearly starting with the basics. I agree that they are likely trying to establish a foundation. Whether they expect us to reciprocate is the question. They could just be letting us know they are there before sending another message. Hisara's wings fluttered slightly, a sign of both eagerness and caution. I think they do want us to respond. They're showing us that they understand communication in the simplest way possible. If we don't acknowledge them, how could they know that we have received their message? Trevok grunted, his claws tapping the console in a rhythm that conveyed his growing contemplation. If they want acknowledgement, then we need to respond in kind. Simple, but not too much. We can't afford to get ahead of ourselves. They might be more advanced than us, or less advanced. We have no idea what they might understand. Kralvek's tail twitched again, his mind processing the nuances of the situation. A clear response, but nothing that could be interpreted as a threat, nor anything that might be too advanced for them to understand. So, we mirror their approach, maintain the balance. Letting them lead will ensure we don't go too fast for them to keep up. Hisara quickly typed a sequence into the console, a response that was similar to the binary message they had received, but still clearly different from it. Not just a slight variation. I think this will do, she said, glancing around at her friends. Any objections? Kralvek watched the sequence flash onto his screen, his eyes narrowed in thought. After a long pause, he nodded. No objections. Let's see where it leads. Elliot stared at the string of numbers on the communications screen, situated on the left of his seat. The aliens had responded, their binary sequence subtly different from his own, but clearly deliberate. They were engaging, mirroring his attempts and expanding on them. The exchange was a confirmation. This was another mind, deliberate and aware. He leaned back in his chair for a moment, steadying himself. The training had prepared him for this, but the reality of actual first contact was overwhelming. The next step had to be methodical, deliberate. He wasn't just building a bridge between minds, he was laying the first stones for understanding between two peoples. He could not afford any mistakes. Elliot keyed in his next sequence, deciding to move beyond the simple repetition of his first message. The aliens had already proven they could process binary and respond in kind. Now, he needed to demonstrate structure, how smaller parts could work together to form a larger, cohesive whole. He began with shapes. A square rendered as a sequence of binary points, each representing a distinct corner or side. Then he added a similar image, this time a larger square composed of many smaller ones, each individually defined within the whole. The idea he hoped to communicate was simple yet profound. Data wasn't just a sequence of ones and zeros. It could be organized, layered, and structured to convey complex meanings. This was the foundation of language itself, components working together to form something greater. The response came after a few minutes. The alien's binary patterns had shifted as well, just like his own. What Elliot saw on his screen was unmistakably similar to his own shape sequences, but reconfigured. They had taken his initial square and broken it apart, rearranging the smaller squares into a new pattern. Elliot felt his pulse quicken. They understood. More than that, they were showing their ability to interpret and reimagine what he sent them. The realization brought a smile to his face. This was no longer just communication. It was the beginning of mutual comprehension. Elliot leaned forward as he composed and refined his next message. This time he built further on that same principle of structured data. He created a sequence that illustrated progression. A single square, then 2 joined together, followed by a grid of 4, then 16, each step adding complexity. The concept of growth, of building towards something greater. Elliot hoped it would help them understand that he was trying to build up to something. Again he waited, the minutes stretching on endlessly. When the response arrived, it didn't just replicate his progression, it extended it. The aliens added another layer, forming a grid of 32. They were not just matching him step for step, but moving forward, collaborating. This was it. Elliot's heart raced as he moved to the next step. The principle of structured data had been established. Now, he could prepare them for the payload. A large data set on the English language, including audio files with samples of human speech and visual examples of most words and concepts. First, though, he needed to ensure they would recognize it. As such, Elliot constructed an abstract diagram, a large square filled with smaller squares, each uniquely marked. It symbolized a collection of data, something vast yet cohesive. Alongside it, he paired a smaller series of shapes and symbols meant to suggest a key, a way to decipher the larger pattern. Satisfied, he sent the message. He didn't expect a perfect response. The idea of encoding and decoding was far too complex to fully communicate in such a manner, but if they recognized even the broad strokes of his intent, it could be enough to proceed. What felt like an hour later, his console chimed. The aliens had responded, their own diagram appearing on his screen. It was cruder than his, the shapes less intricate, but the meaning was there. They had drawn a similar structure, a larger whole composed of distinct parts, and had even attempted to include their version of a key. Elliot exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. They were ready as he could probably make them anyway. The first bridge had been built. Now, it was time to send them the full data set, and hope they could take the next step toward understanding. He steadied his hands and began to compose his next message. First, the binary string that had started it all, followed by the binary square he had sent in his second transmission. Then came the square made up of smaller squares, then the expanding grid, and then the diagram he had sent in his previous message. After this came the language data. These are all ways to communicate information. He hoped to communicate to them, and this is another. Elliot was about to send the message, but stopped himself. He wanted to add something more, a way to reward the successful interpretation of this message. He pondered for a few seconds before recording an audio file and attaching it to the very end of this long chain. Krelvek leaned forward as he watched the latest transmission come in, his tail twitching as he processed the enormity of the transmission they were receiving. It was unlike anything they had received before. It started simple, but quickly became incredibly complex. This is different, Hasara said, her feathers shaking in fascination. Look here. She gestured to the start of the transmission. That's the binary we received at the start, then the square, followed by the smaller squares. It's a repetition of how our communication has progressed. But why? Trevok leaned in. If the idea is showing how our communication evolved, could it be that there is some significance to that massive new part? I think we need to look at the full picture, Hasara replied. If this is a new way of communicating, we can't analyze it piece by piece. Agreed. We need a systematic approach, Kralvek said as he accessed the station's AI inputting the transmission. As the AI began processing, the room fell silent. The once chaotic stream of binary slowly began to form organized patterns on the screen. For hours the work continued when suddenly an alert pinged. "What's this?" Kralvek asked as he brought it up on the main screen hanging on the wall. Hisara's feathers bristled. "Audio data. The transmission contains a whole set of audio files." She accessed one and played it. As the speakers crackled, an unfamiliar series of sounds filled the room. Trevik shot up from his seat. "It's not just audio, it's language. Look, there's visual data too." Kralvek's eyes widened. "That's it. That must be what they intended to communicate. Every transmission had a new and more complex way of structuring and communicating information. This is the next step. Spoken language." "Then we can analyze the structure," Hisara said, eager. "We can combine it with the visual patterns we've identified and start figuring out their language." Kralvek instructed the AI to sync the audio with the visual data while continuing to try and decode the remaining binary data. The AI processed the information rapidly, overlaying both types of data in ways that started to make more and more sense. Eventually, the AI announced its completion of the task. It had been given with a clear and gentle chime. The main screen showed videos, each with text below it that probably described the visual data. The text also had an audio file attached, which the AI marked as likely being the auditory version of the text. All three of them looked at the screen, in disbelief when Trevik suddenly broke the silence. "There's another audio file here, but it has no corresponding video or text." Kralvek nodded. "Not encoded the same way. Maybe a message? Something for us to hear once we could translate it?" Hisara instructed the AI to isolate the solitary audio file and use the rest of the data to translate this new language, cueing the audio file to be translated and played once the AI was done with its task. Minutes later, the speakers hummed to life and a deep yet friendly-sounding voice filled the room. "I am Elliot Kane, pilot of the TFS Ishtar. I am an explorer, and I speak to you on behalf of all humanity. We would like to say hello." The room was silent for some time as everyone processed what had just happened. Trevik was the first to speak. "Well then, I guess we better open proper communications with Elliot Kane here and introduce ourselves." Hisara nodded, her feathers shifting with what could only be described as nervous anticipation. "Let's open a direct channel. If they're willing to reach out to us like this, we should respond in kind." Kralvek was about to initiate contact, but before he could proceed, a harsh klaxon blared through the station, red warning lights flooding the room. His tail lashed sharply. "What now?" he growled, already turning toward the sensor display. "Proximity alert," Trevik barked. The scanners automatically targeted the source of this new signal as the holographic display flickered to life, showing a large ship emerging from subspace. Its design and weapons made it plain for all to see. Hisara's eyes narrowed as she gripped the edge of the console. "Pirates, and they're coming straight for us." Elliot's eyes widened as he stared at the DSS's visual feed. A large ship had materialized near the alien station, seemingly emerging from some form of faster-than-light travel. Drones swarmed out of the station immediately, engaging the new arrival, but it was a futile effort. Their weapons had no effect, deflected harmlessly by what appeared to be a powerful energy shield. Those drones didn't stand a chance. Protocol was explicit. Elliot was not permitted to interfere. This could be part of a larger conflict, a war, a political dispute, one that humanity couldn't afford to stumble into. Intervening risked dragging Earth into battles it couldn't win, alliances it couldn't predict. Elliot clenched his fist, shaking his head as his hand moved to engage the MSD at full power. "Protocol be damned," he muttered. What kind of message would it send if humanity did nothing? Deep down, Elliot knew this wasn't his reason for acting, just a justification. He didn't really care, though. He felt a kinship with the mysterious aliens he had been communicating with. He wasn't going to let them die. The TFS Ishtar roared into action as the MSD broke the laws of the universe. Her mass now equal to the square root of -1, she rapidly accelerated beyond the speed of light. Elliot's mind was racing almost as fast as his ship. The Ishtar was well armed, but he had no idea if her weapons could penetrate the alien ship's shields. As he neared the station, his scanner feed updated. The alien ship's main weapon fired, releasing 2 plasma bolts that homed in and struck an important-looking part of the station. Elliot stared, dumbfounded. Their weapons were centuries ahead of anything he had. "Their weapons!" he whispered, his thoughts coalescing into a risky plan. When the Ishtar arrived at the station and the MSD deactivated, the battle was already over. The station's drones, had been annihilated, and the alien ship was already swiveling its main weapon toward the Ishtar. Elliot wasted no time, slamming the thrusters to maximum. The Ishtar surged forward, her sublight engines roaring to life. Twin plasma bolts erupted from the alien vessel, screaming through the void toward the Ishtar. Elliot braced himself, waiting until the last moment before activating the topside emergency thrusters. These small chemical propellants, strategically placed across the hull, would react violently when mixed, practically exploding a ship onto a new trajectory. The Ishtar shook as the explosive force shoved it downward, shaking the entire cockpit. Elliot's harness strained to keep him in place as the plasma bolts blazed overhead, close enough to heat the air inside the cabin. Sweat beaded on Elliot's forehead from both the heat and the stress as he checked the rear cameras. The plasma bolts streaked onward briefly, then curved back, locked onto his ship. His attention returned forward. The alien vessel loomed larger now, its silhouette dominating his view more and more as the Ishtar got closer to this mysterious foe. Elliot killed the thrusters and keyed a series of buttons. All over the hull, panels slid back and weapons emerged. As the weapons extended into position, Elliot turned the Ishtar around, rotating her nose opposite to her trajectory. Without propulsion, the ship was carried onward by her momentum. Now moving backward, the Ishtar passed beneath the alien vessel. The moment his ship cleared the enemy's underbelly, Elliot engaged both the main and ventral thrusters. The main thrusters fought to negate the Ishtar's existing momentum, while the ventral thrusters pushed her upward. The Ishtar came to a standstill a few hundred meters from her foe, who was now directly between the Ishtar and the plasma bolts. That were pursuing her? It was a gamble, but it was the only shot he had. The plasma bolts collided with the pirate ship. The ship's shields flared bright white, struggling to withstand the impact before collapsing under the weight of its own weapon. The weapons that had emerged from the Ishtar roared to life, two large guns on top of the ship unleashing a storm of relentless firepower. The barrage struck the pirate ship's hull with merciless brutality, tearing through its armor. Sensors made to collect research data on a gravitational anomaly struggled to track the scale of the onslaught as each successive impact hammered deeper into the pirate vessel. Trevok froze as he watched, his eyes wide in disbelief. "What are these?" he muttered, trying to comprehend the scale of the destruction unfolding before him. The pirate ship's shields had already failed against its own plasma weapon, and now its hull was being torn apart with relentless precision. Suddenly, dozens of missiles launched from 5 different locations all over the Ishtar's hull, disappearing into the hole that had been torn open. "Reactor breach!" Hasara's voice rang out moments later, sharp and panicked. Her eyes were fixed on her screen, her feathers bristling with a mix of awe and horror. The pirate ship seemed to collapse in on itself before being consumed by a massive fireball. A violent explosion ripped through the vessel, its remnants scattering into the void as the shockwave rocked the station. Kralvek's claws gripped the edges of his console, trying to keep himself stable as the entire station shook. One ship did this? His words held a mix of disbelief and cautious admiration. Trevok's tail flicked in awe, still processing what he had witnessed. "An explorer," he muttered, his voice low with a mix of awe and confusion. They said they were an explorer, and yet this? Hasara's gaze softened slightly, the initial shock fading into something more reflective. "They saved us," she said quietly, as she watched the debris of the pirate ship drifting through space. Trevok nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to the now silent Ishtar. "They're more than just an explorer, must be," he said, his tone lined with curiosity. "I think we were about to initiate communications before those pirates arrived. We should do so now." Kralvek quickly tapped a sequence of buttons on the main console, the station's communication systems flickering. The pirate attack had damaged the station's main communication array, but the short-range systems were still operational. He attempted to contact the Ishtar multiple times, but no response came. The trio fell into a tense silence, their attention still fixed on the Ishtar. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the ship began to shift. Slowly, deliberately, it turned and began to glide toward the largest landing pad on the station. "That's the landing pad," Trevok said, his voice quiet but concerned. "Could it have been damaged in the explosion?" Kralvek studied the ship's movement closely. There was no mistaking it. The Ishtar was injured, but it seemed determined to land. He let out a low hiss, his claws tapping thoughtfully against the console. We'll have to prepare. When it lands, we make contact. And we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The sudden explosion had hit like a battering ram. Elliot guided the wounded Ishtar carefully toward what he believed to be a landing pad. The massive ship, weighing over 1,800 tons and measuring over 160 meters long, was already a challenge to maneuver, but the damage she had sustained made every movement even more sluggish and unpredictable. Her thrusters were compromised, and the controls seemed less responsive than usual. His hand hovered over the thruster controls, making small, cautious adjustments as the ship crept forward, her movements stiff and uncooperative. Finally, with a groan from the ship's overburdened frame, the landing gears touched down with a soft clunk, magnetizing to the surface. Elliot exhaled, letting out a sigh of relief as he leaned back in his seat. He removed his helmet and wiped away the blood from his broken nose, one of the many results of the shockwave. He must have hit something rather important to cause such a large explosion. Elliot glanced at the console to his right, scrolling through the flashing warning messages that filled the display. Mass shift drive. Inoperable communication systems. Inoperable life support, damaged but stable. Power generator, damaged but stable. Capacity down to 50%. Hull integrity, 58% data storage. Compromised. Elliot's eyes went wide at that last one. He quickly tried to access the exploration data he had gathered, only to find that it all had been lost or corrupted beyond repair. Whatever he had hit in that alien ship must have released an electromagnetic pulse when it blew up. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples before shutting down all the non-essential systems he could. Thrusters, weapons, scanners, hull lights, countless systems went offline one by one. The Ishtar quieted with each deactivation until only the power generator, life support, gravity systems, internal lighting, and door controls remained operational. Dimasidab. Stillness that followed was a sharp contrast to the chaos and violence of just moments ago. It brought with it a sobering reminder of how close he'd come to being obliterated. Yet, as battered as the ship was, the Ishtar had endured. The reinforcements and upgrades he'd installed, designed to withstand the unpredictable challenges of exploration, had held up under unimaginable strain. Without them, he wouldn't have survived. Elliot resolved to try and recover the data later, but for now, he had aliens to meet. Unfastening his harness, Elliot stood and stretched stiffly, wincing as he felt the tension in his muscles. He headed to the small bathroom compartment, retrieving the first aid kit to set about treating his broken nose. The quick but crude work stung, but it was enough for now. The aliens were likely on their way to meet him, so he cleaned himself, up as best as he could, splashing water on his face to clear the lingering blood and sweat. With his nose bandaged and the first aid kit stowed, Elliot began donning his environment gear over his flight suit. There was no guarantee the air on the alien station would be breathable, and he wasn't about to take unnecessary risks. The suit's air supply would give him up to 12 hours without needing to recharge back on the Ishtar. He wiped the last streaks of blood from the inside of his helmet's glass faceplate before sealing it in place. Pausing briefly at the airlock, he hesitated as the weight of what was about to happen hit him. For all the preparation, all the communications exchanged, this was the moment of true first contact, face to face. With his communication systems down, Elliot could only hope the aliens had managed to figure out the language data he had sent before the attack. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the button to cycle the airlock. The ramp extended, and the door opened. From the threshold, Elliot spotted 3 distinct alien figures waiting for him on the walkway that connected the landing pad to their station. Exhaling slowly, he steadied his nerves and stepped forward to meet them. The trio watched as a large figure walked down the ramp that had extended from the Ishtar. Recalling some of the contents of the data they had received, Hasara raised one of her wings and waved it back and forth. The figure paused for a moment, before reciprocating the gesture, then resumed its approach. As it came closer, they could see more and more through the transparent plate on the front of what looked to be its helmet. Its skin was a beige tone, with what looked like black fur, on top of its head and shorter black fur along the bottom of its face. Kralvek stepped forward cautiously as he activated his translator. "Greetings," he said. The device rendered his words into the language transmitted to them earlier. "We are researchers aboard this station." The figure paused again a few paces away, seemingly recognizing the familiar language. "Hello," it replied in a voice the trio recognized from their earlier communications. I presume you are the ones I've been in contact with? Seeing the being in person, a life form from an unknown species who had risked itself to save them, was both humbling and surreal. Yes, Kralvek said, inclining his head slightly. I am Kralvek Toynar. These are my colleagues, Hisara Quaril and Trivok Dalnar. We are researchers aboard this station. Hisara ruffled her feathers lightly, her gaze switching between the figure and the massive ship it had emerged from. You are Elliot Kane? She asked hesitantly, though the answer was already clear. The figure nodded. That's correct. Explorer and pilot of the TFS Ishtar. It's good to finally meet you in person. It's an honor, Trevok said, his voice measured and firm, his posture straight as he regarded the human with focused attention. Your actions saved us from certain doom. You went beyond what any obligation required. Elliot waved a hand dismissively, his demeanor calm yet approachable. Well, what would it have said about humanity if I just left you guys to die? He chuckled briefly, though his expression quickly turned more serious. That said, I have to ask, what was that all about? Did I just drag humanity into some kind of interstellar war? Kralvek shook his head firmly, his tone resolute. No. The ones who attacked us were pirates, independent raiders seeking resources. They act for their own gain, not on behalf of any government or state. Hisara nodded in agreement. Pirates operate independently, with no ties to the major galactic powers. Your intervention saved us and will not escalate into larger conflicts. Elliot exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Good. I was somewhat worried I sparked some kind of galactic incident. Hisara's feathers flared slightly, in concern, as she looked at the massive ship behind Elliot. The Ishtar, was it damaged by the reactor breach? Elliot hesitated for a moment, glancing back at his ship. Was that what I hit? He chuckled softly. She's seen better. Days. Comms and FTL are completely down, and about half the systems are damaged. He paused before adding, She can fly, but she won't even get close to a fraction of the speed of light. He sighed. I'm stuck in this system until something changes. Do you have a way to call for help? The trio exchanged uneasy glances. Kralvek's ears twitched in frustration before he answered, Our long-range communications array was destroyed in the attack. Only short-range transmissions are possible now. Elliot frowned, nodding slowly. That's not ideal. Someone will come looking for you eventually, though, right? Hisara gave a small nod. Yes. If we fail to report in, a vessel will be dispatched to investigate. But it may take some time. Trevok's claws flexed as he considered this. Perhaps I could assist in repairing your communication systems. If we can restore enough of their functionality, we might be able to reach your people. Elliot's expression softened, his gratitude evident. That'd be a huge help, but for now, I think we all need to take a moment to catch our breath. Kralvek nodded, his tail flicking slightly in acknowledgement. We will return to the station shortly to assess the damage to the station and prepare for what comes next. Elliot glanced back at the Ishtar, its battered hull reflecting the stark lights of the landing pad. We don't know if human life is compatible with your guys' atmosphere, so I'll stay with my ship for now. Feels like the safest option, given the circumstances. Hisara's feathers shifted, and she regarded him for a moment before inclining her head. If you require assistance, you can find us within the station. For now, I agree that rest seems like the best course. With that, the trio began making their way back toward the station, and Elliot turned back toward the Ishtar. Once back in the station, Hisara let out a deep sigh. The trio was quiet as they all processed what had happened. The past 2 months had been a whirlwind of activity. Elliot and Trevok had managed to repair the Ishtar's FTL communications just enough to send messages, though it couldn't receive any. He had sent a detailed report of first contact to Earth. Someone in the Terran federal government must have had a rather exciting day when they were the one to receive the report. Meanwhile, he and the alien researchers discovered that the station's atmosphere was compatible with human life, allowing him to roam the station and get to know the aliens he would come to consider his friends. Elliot had taught his new friends how to play poker, though he was starting to regret it. Just as he was about to reveal his hand, a disastrously weak one, humanity made its grand entrance. A small fleet of Terran ships entered the system, bringing a small army of delegates. Officials, diplomats, scientists, and more. It was a spectacular sight, but no one at the table noticed. Kralvek had called Elliot's bluff, and the Ixar had one hell of a poker face. Elliot muttered a curse under his breath as he laid down his losing hand. The Ixar's amber eyes gleamed as he swept up the small pile of makeshift chips with a calm, deliberate grace. "Bad luck," Kralvek said, his tone as dry as the desert. Hisara trilled a laugh, her melodic voice cutting through the tension. "I warned you he'd see through. You, Elliot, you might be able to fool me and Trevok, but him?" She leaned back, her plumage shifting with the motion. Trevok gave a rumbling chuckle, his tail flicking behind him. Perhaps humans weren't made for subtlety. Elliot opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by a beep from his comm device. The fleet had established contact. In the following days, the system became a hub of activity. During a tense meeting with representatives from the Terran Federation, Elliot had faced significant backlash for his decision to violate First Contact protocols. Intervening in a conflict he had known nothing about had put humanity at risk of being dragged into a war. But when the diplomats realized the positive galactic attention his actions had brought, the criticism quickly died down. In fact, Elliot's heroism was becoming something of a diplomatic boon. The research station, once an underfunded dump only held together by the diligent work of the 3 scientists it housed, was now teeming with construction crews and equipment, being fixed up and renovated as delegations arrived from across the galaxy. The Interstellar Assembly and the Coalition of Worlds sent envoys, each eager to convince the Terran Federation to join their respective factions. Meanwhile, officials from the galactic community began identifying all systems within 100 light-years of Sol. These would immediately fall under Terran jurisdiction in accordance with galactic common law. In the meantime, the Ishtar had been brought aboard a larger Terran ship and repaired, after which Elliot had landed her back at the station, both to go see his friends again, and because delegations from 3 member states of the Assembly had insisted on meeting Elliot personally, on account of him having saved one of each of their people. The Silverus Conclave, Hisara's homeland, had presented Elliot with a delicate wind chime crafted from their native crystalline alloys. The chime, a common feature in Silverus homes, produced soft, harmonious tones whenever it swayed. It was a symbol of connection and creativity, embodying the foreign belief in finding beauty in life's quiet moments. The Voringsol Accord, Kralvek's people had offered a small meditation sphere carved from charete, a material known for its durability and tranquil sheen. It had been inscribed with a simple yet elegant pattern symbolizing balance, a reflection of Ixar philosophy. The Korask Dominion, home to Trevok's people. The Drathaki had given Elliot a small, intricately crafted figurine, a representation of a Drathak artisan in mid-creation chiseling a fine sculpture. The figurine was made of a rare, polished stone native to the Dominion. Each detail, from the determined stance of the sculptor to the delicate patterns in the stone, reflected the Dominion's reverence for mastery and craftsmanship. It was a symbol of dedication to one's craft and an embodiment of Drathak values, commitment, precision, and a lifetime of effort poured into perfecting one's chosen pursuit. Each of these gifts had been given with a decent amount of ceremony around it, and Elliot had to do far more politicking than he liked during those ceremonies. The meaning of the gifts was not lost on him, however, and his promise to take good care of them was one he intended to keep. For now, Elliot wanted to return home for a bit. Having lost 2.5 years of work, he needed to reset and reevaluate. Having said his goodbyes, Elliot strapped himself into the pilot seat of the Ishtar and keyed the launch sequence. The repaired Ishtar gracefully lifted off the platform and retracted her landing gears smoothly. Elliot looked out to the observation deck of the station he had called home for the past few months. He saw Kralvek, Hisara, and Trevok standing there, watching the Ishtar leave. Elliot quickly waved to them one more time, though he knew they couldn't see him through his tinted canopy. The Ishtar carefully left the station and flew into open space, accelerating away from the station. Once the Ishtar was a few kilometers from the station, Elliot began configuring the MSD when he suddenly received a message. "Heard you lost some data." "Sincerely your friends," the message said. A massive file was attached. Elliot began downloading the file to his systems, and his eyes went wide when he realized what he had been given. Exploration data on every single system in the Silvarus Conclave, the Voringsol Accord, and the Korhask Dominion. Thousands of systems, what would have been centuries of work for any explorer, was now stored on his ship. Elliot pulled himself out of his shock and quickly typed up a final message to send in response. When this had all started, Elliot had transmitted a simple binary string as a way of saying, "Hello, can you understand me?" This time he sent the exact same binary string, but inverted. The exact opposite of that greeting, a final, symbolic goodbye. He would make sure to meet his friends again, but for now he had exploration data to turn in. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.